Today is October 18th, 2022. I'm Stefani Burich and I'm here with Mary Goddard. We are on Zoom. I'm calling in from Anchorage, Alaska, and Mary is calling in from Sitka, Alaska. Thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed today. As you know, we will be talking about the various uses of plants, and this and other recordings regarding ethnobotany and ethnomedicine will become part of the oral history collection at the University of Alaska, Fairbanks, and will be placed online in an ethnobotany project jukebox hosted by the university. So Mary, thank you so much for sharing your story today. Let's start with traditional introductions. Can you please ground us in where you are from and who your family is, your name and the name of your parents and grandparents, and where they are from?
Well, my name is Mary Goddard, and I am living in Sitka right now, home of the Tlingit Haani, and I am originally from Yakutat, and I am Tlingit Eagle Brown Bear. I'm Kagwantan, and I run a food blog called Forest Fresh Alaska with my family.
Thank you so much. And can you tell us about your first memories of plants, working with plants, playing with plants?
Oh, that's a fun one. Yeah, geez, early memories. I would say early memories would probably be drying black seaweed with my parents or with my family, going out harvesting. It was something that my grandmother really loved. Eating was the black seaweed, and of course we really enjoyed it growing up as well. And so we would go out and harvest black seaweed, and then we would, on a sunny day, hopefully the day was sunny, and we would put sheets out on boards and spread the seaweed out and let it sun dry.
And then what would you do with the seaweed?
So with the black seaweed, that was something that we would just eat as a snack growing up. And then I remember, later on when I got a little bit older, my parents would sell it as well. You either use it as a trade or sell it to people that weren't able to go out and harvest black seaweed.
Wow, that's fun. That sounds wonderful. And how old were you when you realized that plants were both food and medicine? What would you say?
Oh, that's a really good question. So we grew up with, a lot of subsistence living, living off, fish and moose meat and some plants like seaweed, like black and red. But I also would visit family in Missouri, and the plants were so different there that it was one of the things that drew me into learning more about plants. So probably in my late elementary school years, I would, just pick up books and start learning just a little bit. I just always had a curiosity about it.
And what was one of the first plants that called out to you to explore more?
Well, when I came back to Alaska, so I came back to Alaska, gosh, in about 2010, 2011. And it's then that I really started getting into the plants in Southeast Alaska. And I think I'm trying to think of one of the first plants, but one that I was really intrigued with was Elderberries, because it was one that my grandmother used to make syrup growing up. And knowing that elderberries was a very, popular plant in today's homeopathic medicines, I just wanted to learn a little bit more. And so from there, I actually make tinctures out of the elderberry flowers and out of the elderberries to use as medicine during cold season. And I've really found that the elderberry flowers make a more efficient tincture than the berries, in my experience.
How so? Tell me more about that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, the flavor, of course, is different, but it seems like when I make the tinctures out of the flowers that it fights the colds better, and this is just from my personal experience. And then the berries, it seems like it works, but not as well. Maybe not as efficient. And so if I can, each summer I like to get the elderberry flowers and make a tincture to have on hand.
Wow, that's interesting. How do you make the tincture?
I know there's a couple of different ways to make tinctures, but I kind of do it the simple way. So you just grab a big jar and you shove the jar full of the elderberry flowers or the berries, depending on what you're doing. And, if they're flowers or berries, I always make sure that they're washed, or that with the flowers, they set out just a little bit, shake them off, make sure there's no bugs on there. And then you pour 80 proof vodka over the flowers or over the berries until it fills the jar. And you screw the lid on tight and you shake it twice a day for 6 weeks. And you keep it in a dark place. And that extracts all those medicinal goodness, I guess, from the berries and the flowers.
Wow, that's wonderful. Can you tell me something about your teachers and mentors who would have taught you some of those things?
I guess, when it came to gathering seaweed, my parents did that and taught us, and same with berry picking. But as far as having any mentors or teachers when it comes to other forage plants, I don't really have any. It was just a lot of books. Like one that I really liked was Janice Schofield's book on discovering wild plants. And that was a really good go-to.
Yeah, I think that's a classic.
It is so good. Everyone needs that one in their library.
Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely. Do you have any other books or booklets or websites that you like to reference?
Gosh, now there's becoming more and more, but even 10 years ago, there wasn't seemingly too much out there. Let's see, what's another book? I have a couple on my bookshelf. Let me see. The Boreal Herbal. That one's good. And then let me look at this name real quick. Hold on. Plant Lore of an Alaskan Islander. That one's good. And then what else? There's some things I did learn from some Tlingit elders, which I wouldn't remember who they are, but I just remember at some various points of my life here, Tlingit elders pointing out different plants and their medicinal benefits. One in particular I could remember, I make jewelry, and I was using usnea as a filler for my jewelry boxes because it didn't snag on the spruce root jewelry that I made. And the Tlingit elder had come up and said, "Oh, you're giving everyone medicine," And she explained to me that boiling usnea as a tea was really good for the respiratory system, and it was something that she did growing up.
Wow.
So, and so I don't know if you've ever tried usnea.
I have not, no.
But when you make it, it does very much taste like a medicine. And it's really important because of uric acid, or there's something in the usnea that you have to blanch out first. So when you first get the usnea, you blanch it and then you boil it for about 10 minutes to make a tea. And it does taste like medicine, so I always suggest mixing it with a little honey and a little orange juice, and it kind of takes away some of that bitterness.
Just to make it a little more palatable.
Yeah.
I find it fascinating that, you were saying earlier, your own observation with elderberries and flowers of the elderberries and, picking up things from members in the community. And with your experience, do you work with plants and, how do you learn about plants? I guess my question. If it's not from others, just for yourself, how do you develop a relationship with a plant, and how do you, get to know a plant?
Oh, I love that you said that, because I just recently had a chat with Matt Goff, who does Sitka nature photos, and he does a not a podcast, but he does a radio show on Raven Radio, and we talked about getting to know your neighbors, which are, your plants. And it's true. It's one of those things that typically how I try to learn about it is pick one a year I'm highly interested in, one or two, and get to know it that year. Like, okay, when is it sprouting out? When is it ready to be harvested? And then experimenting a little bit more with it. So one of the plants I did that with was the deer heart greens. And that was a plant that another Tlingit older woman was just showing me. She's like, hey, you can eat these. We used to nibble on these as we would, walk on the trails. And if you go into any book or online, there's no reference that people eat deer heart greens. I think there's one website that mentions eating the berries. And I always laugh about that because I feel like the berries are the least palatable of the whole plant. And with the deer heart greens, just experimenting. Okay, do they taste better when they first come up? You're experiencing it all because there's sometimes nobody that's really teaching you. Is it better to be cooked? Is it better to be dried? And so we've developed some really fun recipes just with the deer heart greens, making a pesto with them, using it later in the season when the leaves are really big and beautiful, using them to wrap fillets of, or cuts of salmon and baking with it. Since right now it's October, so the end of the season, the stalks are really big and the leaves are pretty much, gone. They're not good to be eaten right now, but the stalks taste very much like a celery or a vegetable like a celery. It has a little different taste, but that's how we've been using it. So just discovering and experimenting along the way.
That's amazing. I don't think I've heard of deer heart greens and the recipes.
Yeah, you'll have to check it out on Forest Fresh. I mean, it's such a beautiful little plant. It's kind of like it will cover the forest floor, and typically you'll find them around ferns.
Okay.
And they spread pretty fast. So once you get them, it seems like you'll have a good little patch of them.
Do you propagate plants? Would you plant plants in certain areas just so you know where to harvest them in the future?
I don't, but only because I have access to so much land. Like even our backyard, we have a pretty amazing backyard where it's, the forest is right behind us. And so if I wanted to get, fiddleheads or deer heart greens or devil's club or a lot of these plants, it's right there in my backyard. So there's not too much work I have to do.
Amazing. That's
really. I have an elderberry tree. I have huckleberries. I feel pretty lucky. I have quite a bit of amazing plants just in my backyard.
Yeah. And you don't want to trade it in for a lawn?
No. Absolutely not. We do have a little spot that's a lawn, but for the most part.
No, that's wonderful. Can you share some of your harvesting techniques, since you talked about going out and harvesting, and any protocols or any principles that you follow?
Sure. Yeah, I think if you understand the plant, just knowing like how to harvest it, like if you are harvesting greens, or is not ripping them up by the root, just like cutting them. Like if it's fiddleheads, you can cut the fiddleheads off or pinch them off, and they'll continue growing. And then not taking everything. So like if there's a big cluster of fiddleheads that are coming up, not taking all of them, just taking some sparingly and moving on to the next patch. And so, yeah, and just being mindful of what you utilize. And what else? What's another practice? I heard with usnea, I interviewed this lady a while ago, and she had said with usnea, she's like, oh, we only harvest it when it's like, I think it was like when it was, and it's funny, I can't remember if it was rainy or sunny, but she had a thing where she only harvested if it was sunny or rainy, whatever it was that she chose. But I try to just harvest it when I need it, or if I'm going to utilize it right away. Currently we're at this phase of not over extracting when it comes to our plants and our berries. Like we're just at that awareness stage. And so, I feel as we grow, and if, this becomes an industry, here in Alaska, and people are harvesting and foraging a lot more, that policies will probably have to be in place. But currently, I feel like we're still just at that discovery stage.
Right, where it's still somewhat sustainable for people to go out and play and harvest. And
yeah.
What do you think, what kind of policies do you have in mind? Do you have an idea?
Well, I just remember a couple of years ago speaking at a plant conference in Anchorage, and they had asked, like, someone was appalled that we didn't have certain things in place, like you can only harvest this much, or you have to have a permit. And it kind of, really brought to my awareness that there is places that can be over harvested. However, right now we're at the point of, salmonberries and huckleberries go rotten on the vine or rotten on the branches before people pick them. People are still buying berries in the store instead of going out and harvesting what's right in their backyard, because of maybe they don't have the education of these are actually good for you, they're not poisonous. I think there's this huge education piece that is still highly needed where we live. And then should there, come a point of this has to be managed, then we'll put those things into place.
Right.
I guess I could think of one like, for an example, I think it's Norway has a cloudberry festival, and cloudberries are so popular there that when they are ripe, there's the people that live in the community there's like a day, like a cloudberry festival, where this is the day you can go pick cloudberries. You get timed, and as soon as that timer's up, the next person gets to go pick. So we're not quite, we're not
wow.
there. Not saying we couldn't be, but right now I feel like we're at this phase of like encouraging people to harvest what we have here, because it can provide for you. It could really sustain you.
Right, we still have more natural resources than people take advantage of when it comes to plants and berries. And yeah, I live in Anchorage, and some places do get over harvested up here. You can tell.
Okay.
But I guess in less populated areas, that's not yet an issue.
Yeah, and it definitely could be if people start using it for businesses, right? So I think there is some policies or some permits and stuff already in place for certain things, but not on all the plants.
Right, and I guess it depends on who owns the land and what are you allowed to do and who do you need to ask permission, and I think those are more pertinent issues in more populated areas for sure.
Right. Yeah.
So I was curious when you said that you heard from this one person that they only harvest at in certain weather conditions. Or do you have a preference or a practice? Harvest in the morning versus in the evening, or sunny days, rainy days.
I really don't. I think it just depends on. For me, it depends on when I have the time, or there's certain plants like berries are better to be picked, and I feel like after sunshine, you can go pick them in the rain before they all fall off the branches. But if you can get them before it's really rainy and before they're bogged down with water, I think you get a different flavor, or more flavor. And then with other plants, I really don't have any particular times.
Okay. What kind of berries do you harvest? You mentioned a couple.
Yeah, let's see. There's several different berries here. We have, of course, salmonberries. We have the red huckleberries and the black huckleberries, which people call blueberries. And then we also have blueberries. Growing up in Yakutat, we had cranberries. We have gray currants, which are one of my favorites. We have the elderberries, which we use for medicine or for syrup. There's Jacob berries. There's watermelon berries. And I think that's about it. Yeah.
And do they, I think in the Sitka area, do they ripen pretty much at around the same time? Or is there
that's a really good question. So it's changing quite a bit. And I would guess it would be from climate change. But we've had, last year was really weird. We had the huckleberries and the blueberries ripen before the salmonberries, which typically never happens. Typically you have your salmonberries and then you'll have your huckleberries later. But yeah, last year it was just really odd. The salmonberries got ripe after the huckleberries, and I didn't quite understand that.
Interesting.
A lot of changes for sure.
What are some of the other changes you've noticed, if you can think of any?
It's just not super consistent when things are ripe or ready to be harvested. I feel like the last several years with the weather changes, you don't know when. Like, I think when I first moved here, I was kind of tracking like when things would be ripe, trying to write it down, because it's not something I think about. Like, when they're ripe, I go harvest them. But when you're trying to teach it, you have to kind of be a little more mindful, right, of when this is ripe and when you can harvest it. And I feel like it's just kind of been all over the board the last couple of years.
So do you find that it's just things ripen earlier or later every year, and there's not really any consistency anymore?
Yeah, definitely some things coming earlier, like I was saying, the huckleberries last year, and then the salmonberries being later. So I don't really know exactly how that works, but and then I think too, it depends if it's warmer in the beginning of the year, then things start, coming to be, and then if it snaps back into a cold freeze, it can kind of change that season,
Do you start seeing patterns, like with what you just said with the weather, like where you start in the beginning of the summer, depending on what the weather is doing, you kind of get a sense of what might happen? Or is it just too much all over the place?
Yeah, I don't want to say it's like all over the place, but it's definitely been a little bit different the last couple of years. I feel like it's been maybe a little more predictable previously, like, okay, come July the salmonberries are out, or, there's some consistency, and now it doesn't seem to be as consistent.
How has the weather changed in the last few years?
We've seen kind of been all over. We had, about 2 years ago, we had a ton of storms in the fall time, and a lot more rain, less snow. And the temperatures have gone up. So with that temperature rising, I think even the temperature in the ocean's rising a little bit, so it changes. I'm sure even like the ocean plants, like the seaweeds.
Do you still harvest seaweeds?
I do. It kind of depends if I have the time or if I make the time to go harvest. This year we harvested some Bladderwrack, and I felt like it, I could be wrong, I felt like that went longer into the season this year. Lasted a bit longer, but yeah, we were able to harvest some Bladderwrack, and that's a really good medicinal seaweed. So it's one of those seaweeds that, it's not like the black or red ribbon where you can eat handfuls of it at a time. You'd probably eat a lot less of it than some of the other seaweeds at one time.
And what was that called again?
Bladderwrack, or a common name is popweed.
Bladderwrack, okay, yes. And then how do you use that medicinally?
Well, I think just eating it, right? I think you can eat it or you can make a tea out of it. I've never tried it as a tea, but I have read that you can do that. We just dry it and, you can snack on it, or my favorite way of preparing it was, it has a jelly-like substance in the inside. And when you cook with it, it's really rich. We used it one time under the skin of a whole chicken that we baked, and it almost acted like a butter around the chicken. It was really good.
Wow. We'll be right there for dinner.
Right? Come on over. But it's just interesting because, like, when you experiment with the different seaweeds or the different plants, that's something that I kind of learned just through experimenting with that with Bladderwrack. When you cook with it, you use a whole lot less. You almost treat it like a fat, like a butter. Whereas some of the other seaweeds you would treat as a vegetable, right? Like a whole lot more to your dish. It's really palatable and delicious. And whereas some of the stronger seaweeds like that Bladderwrack, you would use a whole lot less.
Right, that makes sense. And then what are some of the medicinal qualities of the Bladderwrack?
I know it's good for thyroid functions. So if you have any thyroid issues, a lot of people homeopathically would use that. The amounts, I'm not sure. But I know that's one thing that it's supposed to have been really good for. That's
awesome. And tell me about some of the other seaweeds you're using. Like, up here in Anchorage, seaweeds is not really that popular here, at least in my harvesting world. So tell me more about seaweeds.
Well, the black seaweed is, really traditional. It's just so delicious. And it's a nice hearty seaweed. And then there's red ribbon seaweed, which a lot of people add to their soups. And then one of my favorites is sea lettuce. And it's so different because it's a really, like, when you dry sea lettuce, it's like almost just crumbles, and it's just light, and it can dissolve in your mouth. And so all the different seaweeds, there's like kelp,